May 28, 1940, Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring leaned back in his chair, a thin cloud of cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling. In his hands lay an intelligence report he could barely bring himself to finish. The document detailed President Franklin D. Roosevelt's audacious proposal to Congress, a plan for the United States to produce an almost unthinkable 50,000 dozens military aircraft every year. Göring's lips curled into a sneer. Slamming the report onto his desk, he scoffed to his gathered staff. The Americans are desperate. They actually believe such propaganda can frighten us. They know nothing of war production. Let them try converting their automobile factories into aircraft plants. They'll soon learn that building warplanes takes far more than assembly lines. His officers nodded, echoing the arrogance of their leader. None of them realized how profoundly mistaken he was. Across the Atlantic, in the industrial heart of Detroit, a determined immigrant named William Knudsen, once the president of General Motors, was quietly assembling the machinery of a miracle. Knudsen, a Danish-born engineer, had accepted Roosevelt's call to service, working for a symbolic $1 a year. His mission was monumental: to turn America's peacetime industry into the world's greatest war production machine. Under his direction, the United States would launch an industrial transformation unmatched in human history. Within just 4 years, the Americans would not only meet Roosevelt's goal of 50,000 aircraft, they would double it, manufacturing close to 100,000 planes annually, while supplying 2 massive theaters of war separated by entire oceans. The bold proclamation that so angered the German High Command had been made just days earlier, May 16, 1940, as German panzer divisions sliced through France like lightning. Standing before Congress, Roosevelt declared with quiet confidence, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Even Roosevelt's closest allies exchanged skeptical glances. After all, in 1939, the United States had produced only 3,111 military aircraft, and the Army Air Corps possessed fewer than 1,700 combat planes, many already outdated. Yet the president was demanding a 14-fold increase, an impossible number by every conventional measure. When asked who could possibly achieve such a feat, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch famously replied, "First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen." Knudsen had walked away from a $300,000 annual salary, a fortune in that era, to serve his adopted country. He brought with him the genius of automotive mass production, the idea that precision, repetition, and speed could win wars as surely as bullets. The results came fast. By December 1941, American factories were already producing 2,000 military aircraft per month, a 20-fold increase in only 2 years. The Ford Motor Company announced plans for a vast bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle facilities, while Douglas Aircraft hired tens of thousands of new workers. The arsenal of democracy was awakening, and it would soon thunder across the world. The Nazi leadership's dismissal of America's potential was born of arrogance, racism, and sheer blindness. General Friedrich von Bötticher, Germany's military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, repeatedly warned Berlin of America's enormous industrial capacity. His December 1940 cable cautioned, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights." But in Berlin, those words fell on deaf ears. Hitler and his generals dismissed the reports as defeatist exaggeration. When Bötticher met with Hitler in February 1939 to discuss US capabilities, the Führer erupted into a furious tirade. Instead of listening to intelligence data, he ranted about so-called racial inferiority. Hitler declared that Americans were half Judaized, half Negro, and therefore incapable of waging a long war. That poisonous ideology blinded him to reality, and would eventually seal the fate of the Third Reich. Prejudice infected the entire Nazi command structure. Luftwaffe intelligence ridiculed reports that American women were taking factory jobs, interpreting it as a sign of desperation. They failed to see that democratic mobilization, voluntary, inspired, and collective, could far outpace totalitarian coercion. When analysts received reports of US factories running 3 shifts around the clock, they dismissed them as wild exaggerations. The Nazi worldview could not comprehend the American miracle taking shape. That miracle found its ultimate symbol in Ford's Willow Run plant. and industrial, cathedral of steel and innovation. Built on Michigan farmland beginning April 18, 1941, Willow Run would become the largest factory under one roof on Earth, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching a full mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's head of production, boldly promised to build one B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, even though other factories managed just one per day. The early months were disastrous. The first completed B-24, rolled out in September 1942, had to be completely rebuilt due to design flaws. Nearly half of all parts failed quality control. By February 1943, production barely reached 56 bombers per month, far short of the hundreds promised. Skeptics began to mock the plant, calling it "Will It Run?" instead of Willow Run, but Ford's engineers refused to surrender. They broke down the bomber's 480 to 193 individual parts into smaller sub-assemblies. They developed hydraulic riveting machines, prefabricated wiring harnesses, and perfected moving assembly lines that brought aviation into the age of automotive precision. In 1943 alone, they adapted to 578 design changes and still kept production moving. By September 1943, output soared to 148 bombers per month. By December, it hit 365. Then came the true breakthrough. In April 1944, Willow Run produced 428 B-24s in a single month, one bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That single American factory was now outproducing the entire German aviation industry. German pilots would first realize this shocking truth during the brutal campaign in Tunisia, when wave after wave of American aircraft filled the skies. The Luftwaffe's disbelief turned to dread. The industrial storm they had mocked was now upon them. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commander of JG-77, noted with grim concern in December 1942, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. The most troubling part is, there are more of them every single day." That realization spread like wildfire through the Luftwaffe command in 1943. On January 27th, the unthinkable happened. The first American bombing raid struck German soil itself. 64 bombers targeted Wilhelmshaven, marking the day the war truly reached Germany's skies. By October, during what became known as Black Thursday over Schweinfurt, the Americans could lose 60 B-17 flying fortresses in one day and replace every one of them within 2 weeks. The arithmetic of war had turned in America's favor, and the Luftwaffe knew it. Then came Big Week. Between February 20th and 25th, 1944, the combined 8th and 15th Air Forces unleashed an all-out offensive, over 3,500 bomber sorties aimed squarely at German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters, but worse still, nearly 100 veteran pilots, men who could never be replaced. When General Adolf Galland reported to Hermann Göring, his tone carried the weight of inevitability. "We're losing 1,200 fighters every month, and building only 1,000. Across the ocean, America was producing 2,500 fighters monthly, losing just 400. The scale was devastating. One of Germany's most celebrated aces, Major Heinz Baer, with over 220 aerial victories, described a mission over Brunswick in January 1944. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By 1944, the industrial engine of the United States had reached superhuman proportions. That year alone, American factories produced 96,270 aircraft, including 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine aircraft. In 1 year, America built more planes than Germany did throughout the entire war, roughly 94,677 in total. But the difference went far beyond numbers. Each American bomber carried 13 50-caliber machine guns, stocked with thousands of rounds. By contrast, many German fighters launched with only partial ammunition loads. US bombers boasted powered turrets, precision bomb sights, and advanced navigation gear, while German pilots often took off without working radios. At Boeing's Seattle Plant No. 2, by May 1944, production reached 16 B-17s a day. Douglas Aircraft, which had employed just 68 workers in 1936, now commanded a workforce of 167,000 people across 9 plants. North American Aviation rolled out 500 P-51 Mustangs every month. Lockheed achieved the staggering rate of one P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, introducing over 2,100 combat-driven improvements along the way. Supporting industries matched that momentum. General Motors built 57,658 aircraft engines, while Packard manufactured 55 23 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines under license. Alcoa's aluminum output rose by 600%, and Dow Chemical's magnesium production exploded from £6 million a year to £333 million. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurred on the factory floor. By 1943, women, once less than 1% of the aviation workforce, now made up 65% of it. Over 310,000 women worked in aircraft production alone. At Douglas Long Beach, 22,380 of 41,620 employees were women. One of them, Rose Will Monroe, better known as the original Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run, maintaining an astonishing 99.5% accuracy rate. Female inspectors at Douglas reduced defect rates from 3.2% to just 0.3%. To accommodate their growing workforce, Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands and accidentally improved overall efficiency. Lighter pneumatic drills reduced fatigue, while better workstation design cut injuries dramatically. German intelligence, misreading these changes, interpreted female labor as a sign of American desperation. A Luftwaffe intelligence report sneered that these women were temporary and that production quality would collapse. They couldn't have been more wrong. Precision soared. Women excelled in detail-oriented work, wiring, instruments, and inspection, strengthening America's industrial backbone. This wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the very embodiment of democratic strength. While American factories blazed with life, Germany descended into delusion. In February 1944, Göring initiated the Jaeger program, scattering aircraft production into 729 underground facilities powered by slave labor. In the Mittelbau complex, some 60,000 prisoners toiled in inhuman conditions. 20,000 of them died. These tunnels produced more defects than airplanes. Sabotage was rampant. Transportation between scattered sites caused endless delays, and quality control collapsed entirely. The entire Mittelwerk complex built fewer engines per month than Ford's single Chicago plant. Meanwhile, America surged ahead once more. Boeing developed modular B-29 production with interchangeable parts spread across 4 facilities, a level of precision Germany couldn't even approach. Each pressurized B-29 Superfortress, costing around $65,000, represented a leap in technology that German engineers were still dreaming of in prototypes. By early 1945, American factories were rolling out 100 B-29s every month, and then came June 6, 1944, D-Day. That day, 11,590 Allied aircraft took to the skies over Normandy. The Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties in response, a ratio of 36-1. It wasn't just air superiority. It was industrial annihilation. This wasn't a tactical edge, it was industrial annihilation on a scale never seen before. Between January and May of 1944, American air power unleashed over 145,000 tons of bombs on German targets, more explosives than Germany had dropped on Britain during the entire war. The skies above Europe thundered daily with the roar of Allied engines. Transport aircraft carried 3 entire airborne divisions in a single day, using more planes than Germany's entire transport fleet ever possessed. By December 1944, a single US bombing operation could involve 1,200 bombers escorted by nearly 900 fighters, an aerial armada larger than many nations' entire air forces. The P-51 Mustang, with its long range, blistering speed, and unmatched agility, rewrote the rules of air combat. It could escort bombers deep into Poland, chase German interceptors at will, and return home safely. Its numbers were so immense that losses no longer shifted the balance. German pilots began calling them Indians, appearing everywhere at once, impossible to escape. As the noose tightened, even the Nazi leadership could no longer deny the truth. In December 1944, Joseph Goebbels recorded a haunting admission in his diary. Göring's promises about Luftwaffe's superiority now seem like criminal delusions. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with nothing but rhetoric. Even Erwin Rommel, before D-Day, warned his staff with chilling accuracy. The Americans can lose 10 tanks for everyone we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they land, they will come with such material superiority that no position can hold. And by January 1945, even Adolf Hitler admitted privately to Albert Speer, "We should have listened to Beutler's reports. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments, would later testify that American bombing crippled the Reich's war machine, reducing production by 35% for tanks, 31% for aircraft, and 42% for trucks. He stated bluntly, "The American attacks, following a systematic pattern of industrial assault, caused the collapse of German armaments. Still, Germany placed its faith in technological miracles. The Messerschmitt Me 262, operational by mid-1944, was the world's first jet fighter, a machine capable of speeds 100 miles per hour, faster than any Allied aircraft." Hitler and Göring believed this wonder weapon could somehow turn the tide of war. But production told another story. Only 1,130 Me 262s were ever built, and never more than 200 were operational at the same time. Their engines burned out after just 10 hours of flight, critical materials ran short, and inferior substitutes caused endless failures. Across the Atlantic, America had already begun jet development back in 1942. The first attempt, Bell's P-59 Era Comet, was underwhelming, but Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, was already entering production before the war ended. This contrast defined the entire industrial war. Germany, obsessed with technological perfection, built marvels it couldn't mass produce. America built thousands of reliable planes while developing the next generation in parallel, a luxury only a nation with limitless factories and resources could afford. In total war, quality without quantity was meaningless. You could have the best fighter in the world, but if your enemy could build 10 for everyone, you had already lost. When Hermann Göring was captured on May 8, 1945 by troops of the US 36th Infantry Division, he finally began facing the truth he had long denied. At first, in custody at Augsburg, he remained defiant, insisting that German technology had been superior and that only sheer numbers had beaten them. But his transfer to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, the facility for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, brought relentless interrogation and reflection. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews, documenting Göring's reluctant recognition of America's industrial might. "I knew the potential of American industry was enormous," Göring confessed, "but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That one factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak. It was incomprehensible." He spoke with visible awe about US logistics. "Your ability to supply forces across 2 oceans while keeping domestic production stable, that was beyond our imagination. We struggled to supply troops 500 miles from Germany. You supported armies 5,000 miles from home." At Nuremberg, prosecutors laid out the evidence in crushing detail. Charts showed that by 1944, the United States was producing more aircraft every month than Germany could build in an entire year. They played films of Willow Run's assembly lines, endless rows of B-24 bombers rolling out beneath the American flag. As prosecutors read the names of German cities, those bombers had reduced to rubble, all from that single factory. During his testimony on March 14, 1946, Göring's tone shifted from pride to disbelief. "I always believed the industrial and technical potential of the United States to be exceptional," he admitted, "but I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in just 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible." Prison psychologist Dr. Gustave Gilbert later recorded Göring's fixation with production figures. Night after night, he sat in his cell calculating ratios, comparing the output of a single American factory to the totals of all of Germany's wartime industry. For a man who once commanded the Luftwaffe, it was the ultimate reckoning. He became obsessed with one symbol above all, Willow Run. To Hermann Göring, it wasn't just a factory. It was, as he bitterly called it, that damned plant that broke our backs. When Allied interrogators presented the final figures, 8 to 12,615 aircraft engines built by America against Germany's 241,675. He simply stared in silence. The numbers didn't just show defeat. They exposed a truth no propaganda could hide. The scale of that transformation still defies belief. In 1940, the United States built just 3,111 military aircraft. By the war's end, American factories had produced an astronomical 295,059 aircraft, including 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other aircraft of every conceivable type. It was not merely a victory of numbers, it was a triumph of systems, innovation, and unity. At its height, more than 2 million Americans worked directly in aircraft production, a workforce unlike anything the world had ever seen. The lines of workers were filled with women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled citizens, teenagers, and the elderly, all answering the same call to serve. This was democracy in motion, an army of volunteers who accomplished what totalitarian compulsion could not. Where Germany used slaves in fear, America used purpose and pride, and the difference was visible in every rivet. Men and women who had never seen an airplane up close in 1941 became, by 1945, the most skilled aviation workers on the planet. They didn't just assemble aircraft. They reinvented the art of manufacturing itself. The modern systems of statistical quality control, first perfected for bomber production, became global standards for every future industry. Automation techniques pioneered at Willow Run would later reshape everything from automobiles to computers. The engineers who once designed bomber assembly lines would, a generation later, design the Saturn V rocket that carried humans to the moon. And the women who riveted B-24s, the real Rosies, raised the children who built the space age. What began as a war, mobilization, became the birth of the American century. The financial scale was equally staggering. Aircraft production alone consumed $45 billion in 1940s dollars, nearly $800 billion today. The B-29 program, by itself, cost more than the Manhattan Project that created the atomic bomb. Yet instead of bankrupting the United States, war production ignited a new era of prosperity. Unemployment, the defining misery of the Great Depression, vanished completely. Between 1940 and 1945, the average American's personal income doubled. Ordinary citizens didn't just work for the war, they invested in it. Workers at Willow Run alone purchased over $45 million in war bonds, directly financing the very factory they labored in. Across the ocean, Germany was collapsing under its own weight. By 1944, the Reich devoted 40% of its entire industrial capacity to aircraft production, yet produced less than half of what America did. Its reliance on slave labor backfired disastrously. Sabotage was rampant. Quality disintegrated. And while American productivity tripled, German output per worker actually fell after 1943. The machinery of war that America built didn't disappear after victory. It became the foundation for the nation's post-war boom. The aluminum plants that forged bomber frames soon produced materials for the suburbs. Chemical refineries that made aviation fuel evolved into the birthplace of plastics and synthetic materials. The machine tool factories that equipped aircraft plants became the backbone of America's industrial dominance for decades. Beyond raw production, what truly defined American superiority was organization and adaptability. The War Production Board coordinated over 184,000 companies, from small machine shops to industrial giants, all working in perfect synchronization. IBM punch card systems tracked millions of components across a continent-spanning supply chain, the earliest glimpse of digital logistics. At MIT, the Radiation Laboratory, staffed with over 4,000 scientists, developed the radar and navigation systems that gave US bombers all-weather, day and night capability. When combat revealed that the B-17 was vulnerable to frontal attacks, Boeing engineers designed a new chin turret in just 60 days. When the Pacific demanded longer range, Consolidated Aircraft reconfigured B-24s on the fly, all without halting production for a single day. By contrast, German factories buried in underground tunnels and staffed by forced labor required months or even years to make minor design changes. The Americans could re-engineer a bomber in weeks. That agility, the constant feedback loop between frontline experience and factory innovation, was America's secret weapon. Pilots' combat reports flowed directly to engineers. Engineers' fixes were implemented by workers within days. Even the assembly line teams could suggest improvements straight to designers, and those ideas were acted on. This democratic exchange of information, where every hand and every mind mattered, proved infinitely more powerful than the rigid hierarchy of German command. And in the end, Göring himself would put it into words. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution at Nuremberg, he wrote his final letter. It was a confession, not of ideology, but of industrial defeat. The Americans won through their factories, he wrote. Not by greater soldiers, but by greater production. We were not defeated by courage, but by capability. Not by better weapons, but by better work. Those final lines were the summation of the war's true lesson, that freedom, when organized, could outbuild tyranny, and that the spirit of a united people could forge more power than any dictators. Command, the nation Germany, once, dismissed as capable only of building consumer goods, buried the Wehrmacht under aluminum and steel. Göring's last recorded statement to psychologist Gustav. Gilbert was chillingly reflective. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us, they revolutionized production itself. Every aspect of their system proved superior to ours. That night, Hermann Göring ended his life, but his final words stand as history's verdict on the production war. The Reichsmarshal, who once mocked American industry, died knowing a single US factory had outbuilt his entire air force. Military historians agree that American industrial capacity was the decisive factor in the Allied victory. Without overwhelming material superiority, D-Day would have been impossible, the bombing campaign unsustainable, and the Pacific War unwinnable. Historian Richard Overy summarized it best. The outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the weight of material. The Allies triumphed because they buried their enemies under an avalanche of production. By 1944, the United States alone produced more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined, Axis and Allied together. This wasn't tactical advantage, it was industrial obliteration. But the real lesson of the production miracle goes far beyond military victory. It proved democracy's superiority over dictatorship, freedom's advantage over tyranny, and voluntary cooperation's strength over forced obedience. The men and women who achieved this transformation weren't slaves or conscripts, but free citizens united by purpose. Hermann Göring's contempt for democratic industry stands as one of history's most catastrophic miscalculations. His failure to recognize America's capabilities sealed the Third Reich's fate before the first bomber reached German skies. From 3,000 aircraft in 1940 to nearly 300,000 by 1945, the transformation demonstrated that free societies, when threatened, can achieve the impossible. American workers didn't just meet Roosevelt's 50,000 planes goal, they doubled it. While also fighting a two-ocean war, modern leaders would do well to remember Göring's mistake. Underestimating free nations because they prefer peace over conquest can invite disaster. In 1940, America appeared unprepared. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial colossus, the arsenal of democracy. It proved that production lines can be as decisive as front lines, and that workers with wrenches can change history as surely as soldiers with rifles. Göring's journey, from his dismissal of Roosevelt's aircraft challenge in 1940 to his death in 1946, traces the arc of Nazi Germany's downfall. A regime that confused ideology with capability, tyranny with strength, and propaganda with production collapsed beneath the sheer mathematics of freedom. The Marshal, who once laughed at America's aircraft numbers, died knowing that in 1944 alone, the United States produced more planes than Germany did in the entire war. His mockery became history's most expensive miscalculation, paid for in the currency of total defeat. Yet the ultimate victory wasn't just in numbers, but in method, proving that free workers can outproduce slaves, that diverse citizens can unite under one purpose, and that democracy's factories can outfight tyranny's armies. The B-24 bombers rolling off Willow Run every 63 minutes weren't just machines, they were symbols of freedom. Each rivet driven by a woman who had been a homemaker months before. each engine assembled by a teenager who left school to serve. Each wing built by immigrants who once sought opportunity and now built victory. Together, they proved that when a free people unites behind a just cause, no empire, however ruthless or powerful, can stand against the power of human liberty and production.